Many souls imagine that bringing Jesus closer requires something extraordinary, a great sacrifice, a dramatic change, a heroic spiritual effort. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux would gently say, "This belief keeps many souls from the intimacy they desire, because Jesus is not drawn primarily by what is big, he is drawn by what is daily. The daily sacrifice is rarely impressive, it is rarely visible, it is rarely praised, and yet it is one of the most powerful ways the soul opens space for Jesus to come closer. The daily sacrifice is not about doing more, it is about offering what already exists, your tiredness, your interruptions, your small frustrations, your quiet disappointments, your ordinary duties." Saint Thérèse believed that Jesus comes closest not in moments of spiritual excitement, but in moments of ordinary faithfulness. The soul often waits for a special feeling to offer itself. Thérèse would say, "Do not wait. Offer what is already in your hands." The daily sacrifice is choosing love where love feels inconvenient, choosing patience when you want to rush, choosing gentleness when you feel irritated, choosing silence when you want to defend yourself, choosing kindness when you feel unseen. These moments feel insignificant, but heaven does not measure them that way. Heaven measures love by cost, not by size, but by sincerity. A small sacrifice offered with love can draw Jesus closer than a great sacrifice offered with pride. This is the secret of the little way. Saint Thérèse did not seek suffering for its own sake. She sought opportunities to love, and daily life is full of them. The soul often says, "If only I had more to give." Jesus says, "Give me what you already have, your effort to stay kind, your effort to remain faithful, your effort to keep going when you feel discouraged." These are not small to him, they are doors. Every small sacrifice becomes an opening for grace, an opening for intimacy, an opening for Jesus to draw near. Because sacrifice is not about loss, it is about space. When you give up a small comfort for love, you make room for his presence. When you surrender a small preference for charity, you make room for his peace. When you accept a small inconvenience with trust, you make room for his closeness. Saint Thérèse would say that Jesus is attracted to these quiet yeses, not because they are dramatic, but because they are honest. They reveal a heart that chooses him in the ordinary, and the ordinary is where most of life is lived. If you wait for extraordinary moments, you will miss most opportunities to draw Jesus closer. But if you learn to offer the daily sacrifice, your entire day becomes a place of encounter. Jesus does not need perfect conditions to come close. He needs a willing heart. A heart that says yes in small ways. A heart that offers small things with great love. This is the daily sacrifice that brings him nearer. Not once, but again and again. And in these small daily offerings, the soul becomes a place where Jesus feels at home. One of the most hidden daily sacrifices is not giving up something external. It is giving up your own will, not your values, not your conscience, but your preferences, how you want things done, how you want to be treated, how you want situations to unfold, how you want people to respond. Saint Thérèse would say that this sacrifice is one of the most intimate ways to bring Jesus closer, because Jesus lived this sacrifice constantly. Not my will, but yours. This was not only a prayer, it was a daily posture. The soul often thinks sacrifice means losing something big. Thérèse teaches that surrendering small preferences may cost even more, because preferences are personal, they are emotional, they are tied to identity. The soul says, "This is how I am." God gently says, "Let me shape how you love." Choosing to let go of your way, for God's way, for another person's need, for peace instead of being right. These are daily deaths of the ego. Not dramatic, but real. The ego wants to be understood. The ego wants to be validated. The ego wants to feel in control. Letting go of these is painful, but it is also freeing. Because every time you surrender your will in love, you make room for Jesus to act. Your will shrinks, his will expands, and where his will expands, his presence becomes stronger. Saint Thérèse would say that Jesus is drawn to the soul that says, "I could insist, but I choose love. I could defend myself, but I choose peace. I could control this, but I choose trust." These choices are invisible. No one applauds them. No one notices them. But heaven does, because heaven sees the cost. The soul often thinks, this doesn't matter. Jesus says, this is where I come closer. Every surrendered preference becomes an invitation, not because God demands it, but because love naturally makes space. When you hold tightly to your way, there is little room for His. When you loosen your grip, grace enters. This is why daily sacrifice is so powerful, not because it hurts, but because it opens the heart, opens trust, opens intimacy. Saint Thérèse would say that the soul that learns to surrender small preferences daily becomes deeply united to Jesus, not through emotion, but through likeness. The soul begins to resemble Him, quiet, humble, available, and where resemblance grows, intimacy follows. This is how Jesus draws closer, not through dramatic offerings, but through the daily sacrifice of letting go. So that love can lead. One of the most misunderstood daily sacrifices is silence. Not the silence of isolation, but the silence of restraint. The soul often believes that speaking is necessary to protect itself, to explain, to justify, to defend, to correct. Saint Thérèse would say that choosing silence at the right moment is one of the most powerful offerings of love. Not silence that hides truth, but silence that protects charity. The sacrifice of silence is costly, because silence feels like weakness. It feels like losing. It feels like being misunderstood. The ego wants to clarify. The ego wants to set the record straight. The ego wants to control how it is seen. Silence surrenders this control. This is not easy, but Jesus recognizes Himself in this sacrifice. Because He lived it, He remained silent before His accusers, not because He had nothing to say, but because love chose surrender over self-defense. Saint Thérèse believed that silence offered in love creates deep space for Jesus because it mirrors His heart. The soul says, I could speak, but I choose peace. Jesus says, here I am. The soul says, I could defend myself, but I choose trust. Jesus says, I am close. This does not mean always staying silent. It means discerning silence as an offering, silence that avoids sin, silence that avoids harming, silence that avoids pride. This silence costs. It costs being misunderstood. It costs letting go of control over your image. It costs trusting God with your reputation. These are deep sacrifices, and they are deeply intimate. Saint Thérèse would say that Jesus draws close to the soul that entrusts its image to God, not trying to manage perception, not trying to fix misunderstanding, not trying to force justice, but resting in trust. This silence creates space. Space where resentment does not grow. Space where humility grows. Space where peace enters. The soul often feels that silence means losing. In heaven's eyes, silence offered in love means winning something far greater. Winning freedom from ego. Winning peace of heart. Winning closeness to Jesus. This is why silence is a daily sacrifice, not because words are bad, but because restraint purifies love. Saint Thérèse would say that every time you hold your tongue for love, Jesus moves closer, not because He is impressed, but because He recognizes Himself, and where He recognizes Himself, He feels at home. Many souls believe that holiness is proven in big trials. Saint Thérèse would say that holiness is most often formed in small annoyances, the little things that irritate, the small delays, the minor inconveniences, the repeated interruptions, the people who trigger impatience. These are not accidents. They are invitations. Invitations to love where love is not comfortable. The soul often waits for great suffering to prove its love for God. Thérèse teaches that small daily annoyances are far more frequent, and therefore far more powerful, because they happen constantly. They touch the nerves, they test patience, they expose self-centeredness, and they offer countless chances to choose love. The sacrifice is not the annoyance. The sacrifice is the response. Choosing gentleness instead of irritation, choosing patience instead of complaint, choosing peace instead of control, choosing kindness instead of sharpness. These choices cost something. They cost emotional comfort. They cost being right. They cost reacting naturally. But they gain something far greater. They gain likeness to Jesus. Jesus lived surrounded by small contradictions, misunderstood, interrupted, questioned, challenged, and he responded with love. Saint Thérèse believed that these small daily sacrifices were treasures. Because they were pure, no one sees them, no one praises them, no one records them. They belong only to God. This makes them powerful, because they are not mixed with pride. The soul often says, "It's just a small thing." Thérèse would say, that is exactly why it matters. Small things reveal the heart. They show whether love is conditional. They show whether patience is selective. They show whether surrender is real. Big trials may come rarely. Small annoyances come daily. And daily opportunities form daily holiness. Accepting them with love is a sacrifice, because everything in you wants to resist, to complain, to react, to control, to express irritation. Choosing otherwise costs ego. But it draws Jesus closer. Because Jesus recognizes this sacrifice, it is his life. He lived in hiddenness, in daily contradiction, in constant humility, and he offers you the same path. Not dramatic, but faithful. Saint Thérèse would say that the soul that learns to welcome small annoyances with love becomes a dwelling place for Jesus, because Jesus loves where he is welcomed in small ways, not only in big moments. If you want Jesus to come closer, do not wait for great suffering. Look at what irritates you today. That is where love can be offered. That is where sacrifice can be made. That is where Jesus draws near. One of the purest daily sacrifices is loving when you do not feel like it. Not dramatic love, not emotional love, but chosen love. The soul often believes that real love must be felt. Saint Thérèse would gently say, real love is often not felt. It is chosen. There are days when patience feels natural, and days when patience feels forced. There are days when kindness flows easily, and days when kindness costs effort. The sacrifice is not loving when it feels good. The sacrifice is loving when it feels empty, when you are tired, when you are discouraged, when you feel unappreciated, when you feel spiritually dry. These moments reveal the heart. Love that depends on feeling is fragile. Love that remains without feeling is strong. Saint Thérèse believed that Jesus is especially close to the soul that loves without emotional reward, because that love resembles his own. Jesus loved on the cross without consolation, without sweetness, without visible return, and that love redeemed. The soul often says, "I don't feel loving." Jesus says, "Choose to love." That choice is a sacrifice, because it requires the will to lead instead of emotion. This is not hypocrisy, it is maturity. It says, "My love is not controlled by my mood." Saint Thérèse would say that this kind of love is extremely precious, because it is free, not motivated by comfort, not motivated by reward, not motivated by recognition, only motivated by love itself. This kind of love makes room for Jesus, because it clears space of self-centered emotion. It says, "Even when I receive nothing, I will still give." This is where intimacy deepens, not when love is easy, but when love is chosen. The soul often believes Jesus is closer in moments of spiritual feeling. Thérèse would say, Jesus is often closer in moments of spiritual dryness. Because in dryness, love is purified. It is no longer mixed with self-seeking. It is no longer supported by emotion. It stands alone. This is why loving without feeling is a powerful daily sacrifice. It costs energy, it costs comfort, it costs self-pity, but it brings Jesus closer, because he sees love that is not dependent on reward. He sees love that is real, and real love always draws him near. Saint Thérèse would gently remind you that you do not need a different life to become closer to Jesus. You need a different way of offering the life you already have. The daily sacrifice is not about adding more burdens. It is about transforming what already exists into love. Your tiredness becomes offering. Your interruptions become prayer. Your small frustrations become surrender. Your hidden efforts become gifts. Nothing is wasted when it is offered. Nothing is too small when it is given with love. This is the genius of the little way. Not changing circumstances, but changing intention. When intention changes, everything changes. The same task becomes prayer. The same annoyance becomes sacrifice. The same fatigue becomes offering. And Jesus comes closer, not because you did something extraordinary, but because you invited him into the ordinary. Saint Thérèse would say that Jesus is not attracted by great works alone. He is attracted by great love in small works. This is where most souls miss intimacy. They wait for big moments. They overlook small ones. But small ones are constant, and constant offerings build constant closeness. This is not emotional closeness only. It is spiritual nearness. A nearness that shapes the heart, a nearness that forms peace, a nearness that grows quietly. If you want Jesus to come closer, look at what costs you something today. Not big suffering, small surrender. That is where love can be offered. That is where sacrifice becomes prayer. That is where Jesus draws near. Not because he demands it, but because love creates space. And where there is space, he enters. This is the daily sacrifice that brings him closer. Not once, but every day. In small ways, in hidden ways, in simple ways, and over time. These small sacrifices become a path of intimacy, a path of trust, a path of quiet holiness. Saint Thérèse would say, "Do not wait for tomorrow to love greatly. Love greatly today in small things. That is where Jesus is waiting."